If the whole world were a village of 100 people, 61 would come from Asia. Asia includes countries like China, Japan, India, Russia, Pakistan, and many others. 13 people in our village are from all of Africa. Only 5 in our village of 100 come from North America. 8 people come from Central and South America. And 12 people come from Europe. Oh yes! The 100th person in our village comes from Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand, and all the other beautiful islands of the South Pacific. If the whole world were a village of 100 people, more than half would speak one of 8 languages. How do you say hello, Wei?
Ni hao ma.
22 people speak a Chinese dialect, like Wei.
Ni hao.
9 people in our village speak English, like Jason.
Ni hao.
Oh, hello. Hello.
Boop is one of 8 people who speak Hindi.
Namaste. Hola.
Miguel is one of 7 people in our village who speak Spanish. 4 people speak Bengali, like Sarav.
Aye.
And 4 others speak Arabic, like Fatima.
Aslam.
There are 3 people who speak Lena's language, Russian.
Здравствуйте.
And 3 people who speak Portuguese, like Fernando.
Bom dia.
So, if you could speak these 8 languages, Chinese,
Ni hao ma.
English,
Hello.
Hindi,
Namaste.
Spanish,
Hola.
Bengali,
Aye.
Arabic,
Aslam.
Russian,
Здравствуйте.
and Portuguese,
Bom dia.
you could say hello to over half the people in our village. Wouldn't that be something?
So that gives you a little bit of insight into the breakdown of the world as far as cultures and nationalities. So it's a bigger distribution than you might think, and it's kind of interesting to look at it from the point of view of if we were all one big village, how many different people there would be. In nursing, we have to take care of a lot of different people, and so it's very important that we think about different cultures and different beliefs and different values. So culture is values, beliefs, and attitudes and customs shared by a group of people, and these are passed on from one generation to the next. We teach our culture to our children, and we pass it along. It's the way that people are brought up. It's the situation that they're brought into, how they deal with things like death, holidays. Sometimes the religion is part of the culture, and sometimes it's not. So that can have play a part in a culture. It just depends. Sometimes the nationality has a part in the culture, and sometimes there are different cultures within different nationalities. The building blocks of a culture are customs, beliefs, and values. So we're going to talk a little bit more about customs, beliefs, and values. Some other factors that play into our cultures, attitudes, roles within the culture, and what roles people play, and what defines their roles. So is it gender? Is it position in the family? Is it age? Their behaviors, religious or spiritual practices and what part they play within the culture, and how it passes from generation to generation. So customs are habitual practices or the usual ways of acting under certain circumstances, how we deal with certain things, like holidays, what we consider particular holy days or customary things that we observe. It may be religious holidays. It could be traditional holidays that are part of our nation's identity. For example, in the United States, we celebrate Christmas because there are a lot of Christians in our country, but we also celebrate the 4th of July, which is a national holiday. In France, they celebrate Christmas because there's a lot of Christians there, but they also celebrate Bastille Day, which is a national holiday for them, similar to our 4th of July, but it's a very different day. So there could be different holidays that mean different things within that culture or and their customs. Lent, how does that culture deal with death and birth? How do they see those things? How do they deal with those things? How do they deal with eye contact? Is it direct eye contact? Do they believe that averting your eyes is a show of respect or a sign of disrespect? Is direct eye contact a challenge, or is it respect for that person? For consent, for health care, is it the patient that has to give that consent, or is it the head of the household? Receiving blood, do they believe in receiving blood, or is it against their religion or against their cultural beliefs? Do they believe in organ transplant or organ donation? All of those things can be dictated by the customs of their culture. Beliefs. These are a group of norms or rules that guide human behavior, and they can be dictated by the beliefs of a culture or by the beliefs of the person themselves. Different people within a culture can hold varying degrees of belief in that culture. Some people within the culture may hold very strong beliefs on one thing, while others in the culture may hold varying degrees of that belief. For example, within our culture, there are some people that are pro-choice, some are pro-life, some are kind of in the middle, and so there are varying degrees of that. And there are some people that are very, very religious. There are some people who are not very religious. But in some cultures, everybody believes very strongly in a certain religion. So that varies from cultural group to cultural group. But our beliefs sort of guide what we expect the outcome to be in certain situations, how we act in certain situations. Now, there's no guarantee that our beliefs are always true. In fact, a lot of times our beliefs are things that somebody couldn't prove to us that they're false, and we can't prove to them that they're true. Things like faith in a religion. If a person believes in faith healers, and they believe that faith healer can heal them, we can't prove that the faith healer can't heal them. If it works, we can't prove it was the faith healer, and we can't prove it wasn't. In some cultures, they believe in faith healers. In some cultures, they believe medical treatment is the better option. And we can't prove that either one does work, doesn't work, that it wasn't both together that worked. Sometimes we just have to allow people to believe in their own beliefs. Now, values are goals to which behavior is directed. A lot of times, actions will equal our values. The things that we find important. Values are the things that you find important. And sometimes our values change throughout our lives. Sometimes our values change if we get more information. This can be very important when we have a chronic disease state, because we have to find what our patients value in order to help align their values with the things that we need them to do in order to help them get better from their disease state. If our patient values being at home instead of in the hospital, we have to show them the importance of doing their treatment so that they can leave the hospital and go home. And that might help. with their involvement in their treatment. So sometimes goals or values can, well, they always affect a person's actions. People will act toward achieving the things that align with their values. It's important to them if they value it. Now, cultural conflict is when a nurse and a patient, or a patient and their family, believe and behave according to different values, beliefs, and customs. For example, if you watch the video that I put on there about cultural competency, some of those little scenarios, the nurse and the patient have different cultures, and the nurse isn't acting very understanding of this patient's different cultures. When we go into a patient's room, we can't impose our culture onto that patient. We have to go and find out from that patient what are the values, beliefs, and customs of their culture, and adapt our nursing care to accept, understand, and embrace the values, beliefs, and customs of their culture, and mold our nursing care around those cultural values, beliefs, and customs. Now, the characteristics of a culture, remember that a culture is learned and transmitted. Nobody is born as a baby and instantaneously, when you come out of your mother, you have a culture. Culture is shared. Culture is adapted from the environment that you grow up in. It's not inherited. And culture is dynamic and ever-changing. If you don't believe that culture is dynamic and ever-changing, watch some old 1920s and 30s movies. That's American culture of the 1920s and 30s. Look at American culture now. Our culture has changed dramatically. That culture has changed. It has adapted as people have changed and decided that other things are more important, that they value other things within the culture. And so, even though that culture has changed, it should remain stable. Now, in the 1960s, it might not have been quite as stable as we would have liked it to be. Sometimes culture becomes a little shaky, but it should remain stable. It should remain itself, even through that change. And that is a characteristic of culture. It stays cohesive even though it's changing. So it's dynamic. It continues to change, adapt, and become different. And you always have old people saying, when in my day it was different, because it was different. Because culture adapts. And culture changes. It's satisfying. It persists only as long as people need it. Culture only survives if people need that culture. And it's social. It originates and develops through people. Culture is a construct of people in community. It is a way that people interact with each other. Culture is a set of beliefs, values, norms that allow people to function in community. It's community patterns. It influences behavior patterns, community patterns, even health and illness beliefs and practices. That is part of what culture does. Oops. Sorry. Now, within a larger culture group, there can be smaller, unique culture groups that coexist within that dominant culture, and those are called subcultures. They could be made up of ethnic groups, religious groups, occupations, certain locations like Chinatown, or it could be a subculture group built around music, like the punk rock movement or the blues movement in New Orleans, jazz culture. It could be skater culture around a certain sport. it could be anything like that. A subculture could evolve around any group, organization, common interest. There could be any type of a common thread that binds that culture together. And that could be a subculture within that dominant culture group. Ethnicity can bind a group together to create a larger culture or a smaller culture. It could be a bond of kinship that a person feels with their country or birthplace of ancestral origin. Now, a person doesn't have to be of that original culture to feel an ethnicity bond. Ethnicity can exist regardless of whether the person ever lived or visited that place. They may not have anything to do with that original ethnic culture to feel an ethnicity bond. A person can identify themselves as African American, but their family's been in America for generations. They can identify themselves as German American, but they've never been to Germany, or Irish American, but they're not even sure which one of their relatives was last from Ireland, but they know that their family was from Ireland, and they identify with that country or ethnicity of origin. And that can influence their feeling of kinship towards that country or ancestral origin. And it gives them this feeling of connectedness. And it may influence their values, beliefs, and customs. Another thing that's often confused with ethnicity is race. Race is based on skin color or physical features like eye shape, hair texture. It's not just skin color, but skin pigmentation. There's a difference between the dark brown coloration versus the yellow, which comes from keratin. And that is a race difference versus ethnicity, which ethnicity and culture. Race is a biologic variation, and ethnicity is a culture variation. So those two are actually different. Physical differences like skin color can be mistaken for race. And you have to make sure that you don't equate skin color with culture, because that can actually turn into stereotyping. And even eye shape, skin color, hair texture, make sure that you don't look at somebody and say, oh, well, they're Asian, so they must be from China or Japan, and they must eat with chopsticks, and maybe they're from, Richmond, and they've lived in Richmond all their lives, and their parents lived in Richmond before them. And just because somebody has the race to be from a certain group doesn't mean that they grew up in that culture. If you watch the video that I posted on stereotyping, it's a really amusing and very poignant video about stereotyping that really brings that home. That you can't go by a person's race and automatically think, well, they must be from this culture because they're this race. People of different races can have grown up in widely different cultures, particularly here in America, where just because you're of a certain race doesn't mean you're automatically of a very narrow culture band. Always go to your patient and find out what is their culture, what are their cultural needs. Transcultural nursing means that we care within the context of somebody else's culture. It's always the patient's culture, and we're always sensitive to the cultural needs of that patient and their family. Not our culture, but their culture. We look at their culture. We accept each client as an individual. We always use knowledge of health problems that affect a particular, not really cultural group, but racial groups. We look at, what kind of health problems could that person have based on their genetic predispositions and plan care compatibly, or based on their diet or healthcare needs. And that's how we plan our care. We don't specifically put them into a stereotype category. We look at their risks, we look at their family history, we look at their genetic predispositions, and that's how we look at their health issues. We look at their health belief system based on their culture, whatever their culture happens to be, and every person is an individual. Now, the ANA states that nurses need to understand how cultural groups understand life process, how they define health and illness, what culture groups do to maintain wellness, what culture groups believe to be the cause of illness, how healers cure and care for members of a cultural group, and how the culture background of the nurse influences ways in which care is delivered. The ANA considerations: the culture of the nurse, the culture of the patient, and the culture of the setting. It should be the, not they. So we have to look at all of those. But the most important of those three really is the culture of the patient. We should never inflict our culture upon our patient. And when we do, that's called cultural blindness. When we ignore the patient's differences and proceed to give care as if those differences don't exist, it's cultural blindness. So, we say things like, I know you don't believe in eating red meat, but if you have to get your protein levels up, so eat up. That is cultural blindness. There are a lot of other ways to get your protein levels up that don't involve eating red meat, and we could find other ways. Those patients' values, their beliefs should be respected and honored. And this is very inappropriate. Cultural imposition is imposing our cultural norms or the hospital's cultural norms on that patient or their family. The attitude of, you're in my hospital, you will just have to do things my way. I don't care what your culture does. You're not going to eat roots and burn stuff in here. It's just very inappropriate to force people to follow someone else's culture. Now, we have to respect everybody's safety, but we also have to respect everybody's culture. We have to become skilled at managing language differences too. Now, occasionally, and remember, if you can't speak to your patient, that's our issue. Our patients probably can speak just fine. We're the ones having the understanding issue. There are biologic and physiological understanding variations that we just have to get through. We may have to employ a medical translator. You cannot ask a family member to interpret. If the patient asks a family member to interpret, that is their prerogative, but you can't give a family member permission to interpret. That's a violation of HIPAA. So we have to promote health teaching that will reduce prevalent diseases, respect alternative health beliefs or health practices, and prevent stereotyping and generalization. But when we're trying to manage those language differences, it's very important that if we need translators, it has to be a medical translator, because they are actually bound by the same rules of HIPAA that you are. So that's very important. So stereotyping, that's a fixed attitude about all people who share a common characteristic. It could be age, gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender status, country of origin. It could be anything. It could be anything you could think of. It's some fixed attitude. Anytime anybody says all of those people, excuse me, then that's a stereotype. Because anytime you make a generalization about a group, it's guaranteed that it's not going to cover everybody in that group. It's a preconceived idea, And usually it's unsupported by fact. It tends to be neither real nor accurate, and it can be dangerous because it's very dehumanizing. Those people, them, it's usually the terminology that comes with a stereotype. It doesn't even give those people names. And it interferes with accepting others as unique individuals, as patients who should be respected. Ethnocentrism. This is something that happens often. A lot of people engage in it and don't realize that they're doing it. It's the belief that one's own ethnic heritage is the norm and superior to others. Well, they just don't do things like we do. They just don't know any better. This is really dangerous because it comes with the connotation of that those who are different are undesirable. Ethnocentrism was the basis for the Holocaust. The attitude was, if we just get rid of those people, they're the people that have messed up our country. If we just get rid of them, we'll be great again. If we just get rid of all of their kind, everything will be all right for us. We have all these financial problems. We have all these issues, but it's all those people who have done it to us. Sound familiar? It's something that we have to be very careful of. It affects this country today, and we have to really watch this. It happens in nursing. Well, I don't know why they let those people come in here. We shouldn't even allow them in our hospital. Believe me, I've heard it before. And as nurses, we have to be very careful about it. So now, some different cultures that we treat, and we see some things within that culture. Now remember, these are generalizations, and you always want to look at every single person and find out where they are within this. This is just a generalization about some groups. You can have wide variation, and they may not follow any of this, so you always ask the patient. But with Asians and Pacific Islanders, particularly of Asian Pacific Islander American, they often value self-control, age, authority, and harmony, and take a holistic view of health. Often they use the yin-yang, the balance idea of holistic and harmony. Sometimes they'll use acupuncture, acumassage, or acupressure as a treatment for things like pain or things like that. They may be reluctant to express emotion, very stoic about pain. Some of the typical religions within this particular culture group are Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, and Christianity. They generally follow some fairly strict rules of etiquette. They have great respect for elders, so it's generally important to greet elders first in a formal manner. Sitting with your legs crossed or leaning on a table or desk or pointing at anything with your foot is considered a sign of contempt. It's bad manners. And the head is considered the most sacred part of the body, so you should ask permission to touch the head of the patient. And blood is considered a vital element, so they may have issues with having too much blood taken or losing too much blood. You don't want to touch or cross over the head without permission of the family, because in some of the beliefs that they hold, that may be they see that as a cause of illness. Limit blood draws only after permission to assure them that no one will be given anyone else's blood, because in some of the traditional beliefs within Asian cultures or Pacific Islander cultures, they see blood as the essence of somebody, and if it's given to someone else, then this part of that person can be lost. With a lot of cultures, particularly in the Asian and Eastern belief systems, they don't want to say they don't understand treatments or disagree with a doctor or somebody they see in an authority position, because they don't want to start a conflict, because first of all, it starts negative thoughts and emotions, and if they admit that they don't understand something, they want to save face by not seeming like they don't know, and they wouldn't say no to a doctor, because you don't want to create disharmony by arguing with a doctor because of the physician's status. You don't disagree with authority figures. So you have to make sure they understand that they can ask questions, and it's not considered disagreeing with the physician, and it's their right to ask questions. Having the patient describe things in their own words can be very helpful, and making sure that you allow them to ask questions. Many of people of Asian or Pacific Islander descent have difficulty with lactose, so sometimes you have to be very careful with that. A lot of times they like to eat vegetables in a closer to raw, like a stir-fried version. A lot of times in their culture they don't serve beef and eggs to ill people, and with women who are in childbirth or going to have a child, they eat mostly fish and avoid fried foods. And in most of families, Asian families, the wife and mother is the one who's cooking the food, so she would be the one you discuss diet changes to. If you have the husband who's in the hospital, if you discuss the diet changes with him, he doesn't make the food, so he doesn't go to the grocery store. He's not going to be the one that makes the changes. Now this picture is of a baby, and you see the marks on the back. That's from coining. Now this isn't abuse. This is from a practice that certain cultures do, some Asian cultures, some Hispanic cultures, where they actually take a coin that's been dipped in warm oil, and they rub it on the baby's back or on the person's back. And what they're trying to do is, it's supposed to help take the toxins out of the system. And then this other one, this is from cupping. And what they do is they heat these cups up. They put a burning thing inside of them and get hot air inside of them, and then they stick them on the person's back. And again, it's supposed to pull the toxins, pull the poisons out of the person's system in order to treat pain, in order to treat illness. So this is a very ancient practice that they've practiced for years, and they still do practice it. So if you were to see this, it's not abuse. It's just this practice that some people still engage in. And if you watch the little cultural competence video, they actually have one of the little things was on there. And this is about coining. The coin is dipped in oil, heated, and then rubbed briskly over the skin until welts appear. And it's to draw out fever and illness. And cupping, the hot cups are placed on the skin, and they leave there until they fall off when they cool. It's the same principle. And you see that with Asian Americans, also Hispanic cultures as well. The Hispanics, patriarchal, they value family, and see health as a gift from God. They go to the family first when they're ill. They may seek a folk healer called a curando. Often they accept prescriptions for treatment, so they do seek modern medical treatment as well. They're very vocal about illness or pain. Touch with permission is accepted. They expect a lot of professionalism in dress, and they need to be listened to, and you need to have patience with them. Show respect, titles like senor, senora, senorita. Professionalism. Involve the family in medical matters, with their permission, of course. You have to still follow HIPAA. They may have a different sense of time. A lot of times, particularly, this is Hispanic, but even a lot of people from Europe. In Europe, they have a very different way of looking at time than we do in America. They aren't as time conscious. they're not as to the minute time conscious as we are. So you may see that, like people from Europe, that they're not so time driven. And you may see that from other cultures. It's important to remember that. Respect the spiritual side of their physical complaints, because for a lot of Hispanic people, religion is very tied within their life. And so it's very important. And that's true of many religions, that religion is, for many people, religion is very tied within their life. And so the physical complaints have a spiritual side to them. For the Hispanic community, in certain areas, teenage pregnancy is a very high concern. Infant health and mortality. Diet and nutrition, because the traditional diet contains a lot of fried foods. And of course, when you fry foods, you use a lot of fats. Alcohol abuse and diabetes are two fairly high problems. Lack of sunshine when Hispanic people move north, because a lot of the Hispanic peoples come from equatorial regions, and if they move up into New England, up into England and areas that are very far from the equator, they have issues with depression and mental health. And that has nothing to do with culture. That has everything to do with biologic. When your people have been in equatorial regions for generations and you start moving north, you get depression because you don't get as much sunshine. So you don't get as much vitamin D. In a lower income, there's a lot of drug use. As far as beliefs, a balance and harmony, good health equals luck, and negative forces equals sickness. They believe that there needs to be a lot of family connection and family participation in curing people when they're ill. That caregivers, that the gift of that healer is more important than training. But people have a gift to be a healer, and that they're very demonstrative of pain. They may cry, moan, call out when they are in pain. These are some folk illnesses. Atake, which is culturally condoned emotional responses to great shock, where they wail or cry. Bilis is illness caused by strong emotions resulting in an imbalance of bile. And they believe in like this hot and cold cure, like hot problems call for cold herbs and cold problems call for hot herbs. In babies, when they have fallen fontanelles, that's Malera Cerrado is just fallen fontanelles. They also believe if you admire a child but you don't touch them, that you give the child the evil eye. You're putting like a curse on them. So if you admire a baby, you have to touch the baby. So next is African American. Now keep in mind, this is a generalization. There's a wide range of African American communities and cultures throughout the country, and this is extremely, well, close to stereotypical, I would say, but keep in mind that it can be generalized to be wherever. So this is almost so general that it's, but remember that for a lot of African Americans, health and illness may be intertwined with good and bad forces. You may see them believing that it's God's will or the devil. It may be very intertwined with religion. a lot of the families, in a lot of areas you see families that are multi-generational and close. In other areas you see families that are single parent. So it can really span the gamut. In a lot of areas where they are very close to the church members can be considered family. If in a lot of areas where they are very close to the church, they believe that illness can be preventable if you're attentive to God, and you're following what you're supposed to be doing as far as in the church. A lot of times they believe in home remedies, like, if you get sick, you rub your chest down with Vicks, things like that they use home remedies before they go to the doctor. If they're very close into the church, they may seek out faith healers. And it can be Christianity. It can also be Islam. That is their religion. Don't assume, just because they're African American, that they must be Southern Baptist or that they must be Muslims. Always ask. Ask what their culture is and what things they need. And then listen without judgment, whichever they are. Don't just assume that, they eat soul food or that they don't. Find out which culture they have grown up with and what their culture needs are. Now, for African Americans, hypertension, they have a higher risk for hypertension and diabetes, also coronary artery disease, and certain cancers. For quite a while, HIV was a big problem for African American females. They aren't the highest at-risk group anymore, but they were for quite a while. Infant mortality rate, particularly in younger mothers, is very high. And sickle cell anemia is actually, African Americans are, that's a genetic disorder in African Americans. And also lactose intolerance is a high risk for African Americans. Make sure for darker skinned African Americans, when you're doing your skin assessment, it's really good to do it in direct sunlight because it makes it easier to see different issues with the skin. Remember that when you're looking for pallor in brown or darker skin, it's going to lose the red tone, so it's going to look ashen or a grayer color, maybe a yellow-brown to a gray color. It's not going to go pale like a person who is Caucasian. So, remember that with a darker-skinned person. Also, erythema in a very darker-skinned person is best assessed with palpation, and if it feels warm, you may not be able to see the red in a very darker-skinned person. Also, cyanosis, facial skin, earlobes, nail beds, or mouth inside of the mucous membranes of the mouth is where you can see cyanosis the best in a darker-skinned person. Also, jaundice, look at their sclera, or for blood tests that we take, or stool, to see if the person is jaundiced. Also, I've also been told underneath of the tongue, curl their tongue backward, and you can look underneath of the tongue to see if they look jaundiced. Because in a person who's very dark complected, you won't be able to tell that difference in the yellowed skin. It doesn't show up as well. So like I said, we said earlier, natural forces. Farmer's Almanac, and a lot of the Southern African Americans, also lucky numbers, that numbers have a lot of power, and that events can be natural or unnatural. So if it's a natural event, it's cured by natural means. If it's unnatural, it has to be cured by supernatural means or by like prayer or that kind of intervention. Also, that there's cold, like increased production of mucus, and then dirt, germs have to be expelled by like the use of laxatives. And then if you have high blood, it's from overly rich food, and if you have low blood, that's called anemia. Native Americans. Now, keep in mind there are a lot of different Native Americans, and some groups of Native Americans don't follow any of the traditional beliefs, and then some follow some of them, some follow all of them. Again, this is very generalized, so always look at your patient and ask them what they follow. But with a lot of the Native American groups, they respect the elderly, and they have more of a tendency to work cooperatively. Each person has a physical or spiritual dimension in their beliefs, and there's a balance of laws, the different laws that equal health. So you have your physical and your spiritual have to be balanced, and if they're not, then you get sick. They also believe that there's a natural cycle of birth, life, and death, and so sometimes, they are less likely to do something about certain health problems because they feel like it's part of the natural cycle. Their healthcare practices are very linked to spirituality and living in harmony with the universe. They also may have periods of silence and avoid eye contact, but this is actually considered respect in many of their societies or their cultures. A lot of them live in harmony by respecting the earth and living things and honoring spirits. And if the spirits are angry, then they have to be appeased. They use a lot of herbal medicine, rituals, fasting to bring the body back into harmony. The person who basically is their faith healer is called a shaman or a medicine man or a medicine woman. And the family and community provides a lot of strength. There's a lot of community connection and support. When a person is ill, there's a lot of community connectedness, so the family would be very involved. European Americans, and there's a lot of variation there, value youth, attractiveness, cleanliness, order, punctuality. I think this varies greatly. Three guesses what the person who wrote this was. This is all in your book in chapter 14. Keep in mind there are many countries in Europe, and depending on which country that person's background is from, there may be some variation. And there can be a fair amount of variation. So, keep that in mind. There may be in a lot of those different European countries, particularly Italian, German, very extended family support, and even with geographic distance disruption, they still may have a lot of connection with that family. Elder family members may need support from other than the family because of distance, but they also may be very connected to family. So it varies depending on which countries they're from, and that connectedness. And the fact of the matter is that they may have lost that connection because of being so distant from their roots. Maybe Christianity, it could be Judaism, it could be Orthodoxy. There's quite a few different religions that it could be. Arab Americans value family and affiliation with others. They could have extended family, or they could be separated from their family as well. If they practice Islam, then they wouldn't eat pork. If they're from Europe or from countries over in the Middle East, touch between same-sex friends or members of family is not looked at the same way as it is here. You might hold hands with somebody who is your family member who's same-sex, and that's not looked at as weird. So it's very different. It's considered rude to pass things with your left hand because your left hand is considered unclean in Arabic countries. Now, I don't know that that's the same thing in Arab American, but it is in Arabic countries. In Arabic countries, your left hand is the hand you use to wipe yourself when you go to the bathroom. It's considered rude to sit with the sole of your shoe in view to somebody. That's an insult. But that's in Arabic countries. It may not be as much so with Arab Americans. Most well-educated are well-educated with professional occupations, and they practice personal care and cures from healthcare. They may be very private. Very much want privacy. Want to keep their bodies covered. If they practice Islam, then there's a lot of wanting to women not being able to expose their bodies to male healthcare professionals because they're not members of their family, and it's actually vice versa. Men would not want to expose themselves to females healthcare providers that aren't members of their family, so they would want same gender healthcare providers. So major religions, Christianity, as far as Christianity, all of them believe in eternal life, like the New Testament of the Bible. Christianity is actually no longer the largest religion in the world. Actually, in the book it says that Islam is now. They've been going passing each other, and it's now Islam. Roman Catholic. With Roman Catholic, they believe in baptizing infants and actually aborted fetuses. And now, keep in mind that if a woman has a miscarriage, that's simply a spontaneous abortion. If they believe that if that baby isn't baptized, it's not going to go to heaven. So if there's no priest available and that lady came into the emergency room because she'd started bleeding and she miscarries that baby, you as the nurse can baptize that baby. In the belief of the Roman Catholic Church, any layperson can stand in and perform the sacrament in the place of a priest if the priest is not available. All you have to do is believe, and you can stand in for that mother and perform that service, and do that for her. And that helps her peace of mind. And, if it's a very early miscarriage and she's just lost this in the bathroom, why shouldn't you do this? To help her peace of mind. They also believe in Holy Communion, and they can't have had anything to eat or any alcohol 15 minutes before. Now, if they have to have medications or fluids, that's different. They can take medications or fluids even if they're going to have communion. Sacraments of the sick, ill or dead must be given. The sick or ill have to be given sacraments. Sometimes it's called last rites. But the priest comes in and gives them the sacrament. They're excused from all diet rules if they're in the hospital. So, the whole, not being able to eat meat on Fridays, which they don't actually have to do that except during Lent anymore. They don't have to do that if they're in the hospital. The only birth control they believe in is like the rhythm method. And the only reason they believe in sterilization is for medical reasons. Like if it had to be done, like they had to have a hysterectomy for other reasons other than birth control. They do believe in organ donation. They might have a religious article like a rosary or medals or other objects, so you'd want to treat those with respect. They might have a Bible, which you would want to treat with respect as well. Now, Eastern Orthodox, some of their things may look very similar to Roman Catholic, but they are a different church. That's a church that's split off of the Roman Catholic Church. They believe in baptizing babies at 40 days after birth. They do Holy Communion, so you can call the priest if the patient wants it. They do sacrament to the sick. They're excused from diet restrictions when they're hospitalized also. Their Christmas is on January 7th and New Year's on January 14th. They do last rites, but the patient has to be conscious. And they discourage autopsies, cremation, and organ donation. In other respects, they're fairly similar to the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church. Protestant, there are a whole lot of Protestant religions. Christian Science, they don't seek traditional health care. They use midwives and nurses, but they don't seek any other medical intervention because they see illness as evil and sin is of the mind and not of God, so they believe that you can change your being sick by altering your thoughts rather than from medical intervention. They believe in spiritual healing. So they don't take any medicines, and they just think themselves well. Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't accept blood products. They believe in abortion is forbidden. Organ transplants are accepted, but they have to be cleansed with non-blood products. They don't believe in organ donation because they have to be buried with all their body parts, but they will accept organ transplants. Not really fair. And meat has to be drained of all its blood before it can be eaten. So it basically has to be, it's almost like a kosher, where it has to be drained of all its blood. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the Mormons. The church elders have to be notified in the event of a death. They also have a sacred undergarments that they wear. Some of them wear, not all of them. And they can only be removed in an emergency. You actually have to get permission of the elders to remove them. So if in an emergency you have to remove them, you want to keep them in one piece if possible. And package them carefully and set them aside and give them to family members so that they can, take care of them because they're considered a sacred article. And I'm not kidding. They really do have sacred undergarments. And then they would, take care of those. They also pretty much they have a book called the Book of Mormon. That's some of their sacred scriptures along with the Bible. So you would want to treat that with respect. Seventh-day Adventists, Saturday is the Sabbath for them, and many of them are vegetarians, and most of them avoid eating pork, so they would have some diet restrictions. Most of them don't take blood products either, and they don't believe in organ donation. So there would be a lot of health issues that you would have to pay attention to with them. Unitarian Universalists, they believe in women's rights regarding abortion, organ donation, transplants, and research, all accepted. They have a very broad view of religion, so they're pretty wide open as far as that goes. Mennonites are kind of like Amish that can drive cars. They may wear head coverings. Women may only wear dresses or skirts. Men may wear simple work type pants, and button-up shirts. Men may wear hats as well. The men may all have beards. But once they get married, they don't shave their beards. Being clean-shaven generally indicates that the man's not married. And it depends on whether they're Old Order Mennonite or they're New Order Mennonite, whether they do all of that or they simply kind of dress more plainly and live more plainly. Generally, if they can drive cars and things, they drive cars that don't have any of the fancy stuff on them. And there's a lot of different variations within the Mennonite community as to how much they do. It depends on what kind of an ordinung they belong to, which is the communities that they live in, whether they use more modern conveniences or less. Generally, they only use things that are created for sanitation, work, or in order to, do the things that they need to do to survive. They usually don't use things that are for recreation or merely just for fun or things like that to make yourselves look more fancy. Pentecostal, they believe in laying on of hands and spiritual healers. They may use prayer language, like speaking in tongues. They may anoint a sick person with oil. They may attach a prayer cloth to the patient. May have a lot of the church members coming. The church members may be very close, very much like family members. Some other Protestant variations: Baptist, Nazarene, Church of Christ, United Church of Christ, which is very different from Church of Christ, Methodist, Lutheran. If you have any doubts, you can always contact your hospital's chaplain, and that chaplain can contact somebody in the community to come to visit them, or the chaplain can come and visit them and find out what their needs are. Hospital chaplains are trained to talk with people and find out what their spiritual needs are and meet those needs. So that's always a resource for you. Islam, and don't be afraid to talk to your chaplain, even if they're Christian and your patient isn't, because hospital chaplains are trained to do all different religions. Islam, now the world's largest religion, mostly prevalent in Middle East, Africa, parts of Eastern Europe. It's actually much more prevalent in the United States now. Emphasizes equality of races and social classes. States that there's only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And he wrote the Quran. The first 5 books of the Quran are also the first 5 books of the Bible, also the first 5 books of the Torah, which is the book of worship for the Jewish people. Women may not have the independence in a traditional Islamic family. That they can't make their own decisions. Their husband or their father would be the one giving consent in a very traditional Islamic family. At birth, a bath is immediately given to the mother. Circumcision isn't done until puberty. Ouch. And birth control, they don't believe in birth control. Some of them, and then some believe that contraceptive can be used if the family can't afford mother-child. But they don't believe in abortion. When the person dies, they're supposed to face Mecca and confess their sins and beg forgiveness in the presence of their family. So when they die, they're going to want their family around. And then after they die, they're not supposed to be touched until the family has washed and prepared it facing Mecca. Autopsy is prohibited, but if it's required for legal reasons, then they have no choice. And they don't believe in organ donation. Now, if once the patient's died, they don't believe in that the body should be touched. However, if you have to, your facility's policy is that you have to take off like dressings or tubes or whatever. You have to wear gloves. As long as you don't touch it with your hands, you're all right. Diet, they don't believe in eating pork, and they don't believe in eating alcohol or drinking alcohol. and they believe in slaughtering meats in a certain way. And they believe in washing before prayer time. So you would want to, like, bring them what they need to wash before prayer time, and then give them privacy. They might have a Quran, and you don't want to touch that if you are what they consider ritually unclean, which would be like if you haven't washed, if your hands aren't clean, anything like that. So, you want to be careful about touching their Quran, putting anything on top of it. Muslim women cover all of their body. So if your patient's a female, you want to make sure you keep her covered. And she's probably not going to want a male nurse, because that's going to be embarrassing for her and against her religion. Judaism, they could be Orthodox, Conservative, Reformed, or Reconstructive. If they're Orthodox, they follow all of the dietary and all of those rules. If they're Reconstructive, they really just kind of eat like everybody else. A religious leader of Judaism is a rabbi, and their place of worship is a synagogue or temple. Their religious book is the Torah. And they have strict rules on hygiene, diet, and sexual mores. And the food has to be prepared in a particular way. It's called kosher. At birth, on the 8th day, there's circumcision of the baby, and that's when the child is named, and the Torah is read. They do the same thing for females, but there's no circumcision, of course. When a woman has her menses, they have to go off, and they can't be touched by anybody. They have to go off by themselves. And then after they finish with their menses, they have to have this ritual bath that makes them clean again. It's called a mikvah. And no family members should touch them when they have their menses or anything like that, if they're Orthodox. If they're not Orthodox, they don't really practice that. As far as kosher dietary rules, they can't mix milk and meat. They fast for Yom Kippur, which is a holiday, and during Passover they don't eat leavened bread. And their Sabbath is from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. They're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. And for them, again, when somebody dies, you're supposed to sit with the body from the time they die until it's buried, and burial is supposed to occur within 24 hours after death. They don't believe in embalming. And they don't like the body to be touched 8 to 30 minutes after death, and then only by an Orthodox person. If you need to do basic care, just put your gloves on, you'll be fine. And they only believe in, if the organs have to be removed, like, for any reason, then they have to be returned to be buried with the person. An organ transplant only with the rabbi's approval. They might wear yarmulkes, particularly in synagogue or temple. Women cover their hair after marriage. And for their prayers, they need a quiet environment. And for Reformed Jews, it's just a little less severe. They just don't follow all these practices. For death, they allow life support, but no heroic matters. They may allow cremation. They may not observe the kosher diet. Some of the Eastern religions, Hindus are vegetarians. They don't eat living creatures because they don't want to harm living creatures, so they don't eat meat. They believe that misuse of the body or sin from a previous life causes illness or disease, and they think that you have a little control over your life. God controls it, or the gods control it. And generally, the person controlling health care for the family is the eldest woman in the family, so she's the one that's consulted. They also practice that hot and cold principle. So, like, if you have a hot disease, they give you cold foods or cold herbs. And if you have a cold disease, they give you hot herbs. For Buddhism, spiritual peace through Buddhist teaching promotes health. And Taoists, illness comes from imbalance. So it's like your homeostasis is out of alignment because your yin and yang is out of balance. And then, of course, agnostic, atheists. Agnostics are people who doubt the existence of God, and atheists do not believe there's a God. If you have a client that seems that they're in spiritual distress, you can ask the social worker or the chaplain to come and visit them, talk to them, and see if they can help by talking to them. So that is it for this section. Please look at your videos. There's a couple of them that are really good about stereotyping and cultural competence. So put a couple up there, and make sure that you do your quiz. That's on Moodle on cultural diversity, and that's it. Have a good day.